The DCU could be in very big trouble if Superman Legacy doesn't get these things right. Today, I'm going to tell you what those things are. And these, to me, are the most important things James Gunn needs to get right for the overall long-term health of the DC brand for DCU to thrive and be a success. I am a big DC fan and Superman fan, so I am rooting for this movie, but let's face it, DC is a damaged brand. If you're a DC fan, you know it hasn't been easy the last few years. Hell, even sometimes over the last decade. None of the DCEU movies have crossed the $400 million mark since 2018's Aquaman, and it doesn't look like this year's sequel will be making a big splash. But what if I told you there was hope? A light at the end of the tunnel. And yes, James Gunn is one part of that picture. Before you pull out your pitchforks, just remember, out of the 2 or 3 comic book movies that have been well received this year, that have made money, was a James Gunn film. Now, that's not to say I agree with all of his decision making, and I'm not jumping up and down over all of his announcements, but he is a talented filmmaker, and I'm rooting for the guy. That doesn't mean, however, that there's not a lot riding on this film. Now, let's see what it's up against. Let's start with the obvious one first. This film needs to make money. There's a lot more movies released a year that only make back their budget or make a small return, but these big budgeted blockbusters are different, especially when it comes to comic book movies. Most comic book movies today seem to be struggling, at least the mediocre ones. There's only so many movies you can put out from a franchise and it not make money and just to continue forth. David Zaslav wants a return. He is said to be interested in smaller budgeted characters from the DC library, and if this film flops and the first few DCU projects flop, that would only enforce that philosophy. But even taking David Zaslav and the Warner Brothers side of things out of it, for DC as a brand, it has struggled at the box office in every franchise outside of the Batman and Joker since Aquaman. Even though they've put out some movies I've liked, the general movie-going audience doesn't care about the DCEU. Maybe they don't even know what that means or stands for, and they don't care about these movies. They need to feel a reason to, and restarting a universe and centering it around Superman, I believe, is a good move. It just needs to be done right. It needs to be well-received and make money. This universe cannot afford to be rejected by the general movie-going audience, and it starts with Superman Legacy. It needs to be good. Doesn't have to be great, just good. And David Cornsweet needs to be good, so that the audience has something to look forward to. Something to look forward to in this DCU. Because if this franchise isn't a success, are we going to go for a third DC cinematic universe, or are we just going to be stuck with Batman content? And then we're right back in the Nolan era where every few years we might get a DC movie here and there. Now, I loved Henry Cavill as Superman, and I alluded to it already, but David Cornsweet needs to be well received as Superman. When Henry Cavill was cast, many of you may not remember this, but he was far from a household name. Projects like The Tudors and Immortals were some of his best-known work, as opposed to Superman, Mission Impossible, and The Witcher. David Cornsweet, like Cavill in Man of Steel, can benefit from not being a super huge name and has the opportunity to make this Superman his own. He doesn't need to be the next Henry Cavill or the next Christopher Reeve. He just needs to be a comic-accurate Superman, and there's plenty of different takes on Superman from the comics that are very different from each other, yet all equally and definitively Superman. He needs to be serviceable to the story, the character, and deliver a relatable and powerful performance. And if he doesn't, and people go, "Yup, see, this is why I didn't want James Gunn's version of Superman," or "This is why I didn't want David Cornsweet as Superman," then the DCU has a super size problem on its hands.
I told you so!
One of the biggest concerns fans are feeling with this movie, and it's a concern that really gets more data to back it up quite frequently with all the casting updates, but that is overcrowding. This film's cast is extensive with DC-powered superheroes. I often lose count out of all the announced characters that are going to appear in this movie without looking it up. A lot of people point to the films that suffered from overcrowding characters or storylines as concerns like Batman v Superman, Spider-Man 3, or The Amazing Spider-Man 2. All films I like, by the way, but James Gunn is a very different director than Sam Raimi and Mark Webb, Zack Snyder, which all three of those films also suffered from studio interference, studio mandates, and major cuts and rewrites. Superman Legacy is written and directed by James Gunn, the head of the studio that is producing this film alongside Peter Safran, and they are really the only people that could or would interfere with this movie other than maybe David Zaslav if he was really feeling brave. James Gunn, without a doubt, is going to be able to tell his story, in my opinion. The concerns is that story going to focus too much on other people, setting up this larger new DC cinematic universe, focus on a bunch of new characters that a lot of people haven't heard of, maybe don't care about, and not feature enough Superman in his own movie? All of which are valid concerns. James Gunn has said multiple times that Superman and Lois are the main two characters in this story. And if done right, because I know we're only looking at the negatives in this video is I know it sounds very negative, and that's not at all my position on this film. I am rooting for it, let me reiterate. And if it's done right, it could be the start to something really special that we've never seen before from the MCU or from DC, and James Gunn is great at handling huge casts. We are a small channel, so I'd ask you to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video and you want to catch more DCU videos, as well as truly helping support us. We greatly appreciate it. Until the next video, stay safe, everyone. Goodbye.